Good morning, Ed and Carmen. Nice to see you.
Good morning.
This is Steve Sparks with another edition of Celebrating Democracy. And Ed and Carmen are my dear neighbors just up the street. And they're from Hawaii. And I've been writing a long time about my military heritage, and it always leads back to the Hawaiian Islands. And I felt so grateful for Ed and Carmen to share some of their stories. So I wanted to share that with you for a few minutes. And I'll just introduce both of them and let them say hi, and then say a little bit about themselves, and I'll have a question or two. Hi, neighbors. Welcome.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve. How you doing?
Good. So, Carmen, I want to start with you. You said something to me a while ago that really got my attention. And it was about the blackout. And I remember my dad talking about that after when he was still alive, and I've been doing a lot of research on it. And when you say blackout, that was the whole islands, all the islands of Hawaii, and that involved citizens. So could you tell us a little bit about it? And Ed, I hope you can pipe in. You grew up. Could you tell us where you were living at the time and what was going on?
I was living in Honolulu. I was born in 1946. My dad was in the Navy, and my mom, who was just barely 17 or so, 18, was working in the dough pineapple factory when he met my dad. And from there, I just grew up until I was 9, and I had to leave the Hawaiian Islands, but I still have relatives back there. Lived in Illinois for a while. Graduated from high school there. Worked for a summer, entered the service. Got out of the service, moved back to Hawaii, where fortunately I met.
Yes,
You
and her cooking. I know about her cooking. You didn't bring any of those
Muffins.
muffins, yeah.
Well, I was tempted to, but unfortunately, I only had one left.
Oh.
I said, I'm not sure if you would take the whole thing and not share with Judy, so I
Uh-oh.
said, no, maybe I better.
We share everything.
Okay.
So, okay, thank you.
But born and raised on Oahu. Lived there until our son was born in 71, and have lived in different parts of the U.S. You could almost say north, south, east, and now we're on the west side of the U.S. So other than Alaska, we have lived just about in every climate possible. And when we moved away from the islands in 71, moved to South Bend, Indiana, Notre Dame country, and people were saying, since you're from Hawaii and you don't have the Four Seasons, we give you a year, you'll be back, screaming to go back anyway. But I loved it. We had 18 inches of snow that first winter we were there. Loved the snow. I was like Alice in Wonderland.
Yes, I know. I've had,
snowflakes.
yeah. All right.
But anyway, my dad, I don't know a whole lot about his history as far as being a merchant marine. I know it has become part of the military where they're recognized now. And the one thing I remember about my dad talking about the war, he said for $2 a day, his job was picking up the dead bodies. And of course we know because of the bombings at Pearl Harbor, there were a lot of bodies to be picked up.
Pieces.
And pieces, I'm sure. And he said you never forget the smell of a dead body. They were, from my mom, she would talk about the blackouts. And I don't know how long it continued after the war. It had to be quite a while. The Japanese Americans were put in camps, internment, the houses, some of them are still there. I remember passing a bunch of the homes, bunch of the houses that they were encamped in, and always wondered who lived there. I didn't know till years later that was where the Japanese Americans were kept. But life was different back then.
What did they, did you hear any stories about on that day of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor? You hear anybody, remember people talking about that? You and I were both born out, all three of us were born in 1946, so we're 46ers, right? So do you have any, can you recall any stories about that?
Well, the only thing I can recall is what my mother told me. She was about 14 years old or so. She was downtown with her mother, shopping, and being on a Sunday, the only thing that was probably open at that time was the fish markets. And while they were shopping, they heard explosions in the distance, and they stopped, they listened, and they're wondering what was that. And my mom says that after a while, the explosions got louder and louder, more frequent, and they could hear machine gun fire in the distance, and they saw planes flying around. Now, talking to someone else, they said, well, it's probably Pearl Harbor or the Navy or Hickam Air Force Base having maneuvers. And they said, well, there's an awful lot of noise for maneuvers. They didn't think much of it. Everybody went about their business downtown. None of the planes came by, the straft, the downtown area there. I guess they're only concentrating on military installations. So when she got home, she found out on the news that it was an attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. What they did after that, I don't know. It's probably like anything like you and I would do, just wondering, what do we do next? What's happening? What's going on? Are they gonna invade us? And on the news, they were telling them that there could possibly be an invasion and to take cover and try to find a safe place to be. And you've seen on probably news or movies, whatever, there's a place called Hawaiian Field in Haleiwa.
Yes.
And they had two fighter planes there. I think they were P-40s, if I remember, my memory serves me right, that took off from there because it was a small airfield and obviously was missed by the Japanese and flying around. And they took off. I visited that Haleiwa field when I returned back to Hawaii and scuba diving. And in Haleiwa, just about less than a quarter mile offshore, there's a trench that drops from 20 feet down to about 60, 70 feet. And right on the edge of that trench is an old fighter plane that we looked at and came to the conclusion that it was a downed Japanese fighter plane. It was very interesting, and it kind of makes you when you're swimming around it, just in awe that this is something that happened, that you can't imagine being a part of it at that time. And if you visit Hawaii in Hickam Air Force Base, and the buildings, when you drive by, or if you ever get a chance to go to Hickam, you'll still see the bullet holes in the side of the building. that they left there on purpose as a reminder.
Well, we should be reminded, and I'm just, I think I'm tearing up a bit listening to both of you, and I'm so grateful that you were able to come over and felt like talking about this, because I think these are the stories we need to hear. And all the research I've been doing the last 10 years, one of the things that is always left out: what happened to the citizens? What about all the collateral damage? What were the citizens going through? And you've shared that story, and I hope we can do it again. And thank you. I'm grateful for two of you. I love you. Thank you for coming over.
Hey, you're welcome.
Okay. See you next time.